Hi, everyone. Welcome to the pre-order podcast. I am Bob Lingle of the Good Neighbor Bookstore in Lakewood, New York, here today with Emeline Atwood, author of A Real Animal that comes out July 7th, but is available for pre-order today. Emeline Atwood graduated from Michener Center for Writers in 2023. She writes fiction and poetry and is the recipient of a number of awards, some of them being the Thomas T. Hoops Prize, the Louis Begley Prize, and the LeBaron Russell Briggs Prize, Fiction Prize. She lives in Austin, Texas. Thanks so much for joining us today for a chat about A Real Animal.
Thank you, Bob.
And it was great to meet you. We met back in February at the Winter Institute at the White Whale bookstore, which I had been dying to go to the White Whale bookstore for quite some time. And it's only 2.5 hours from my store. So I had a poor excuse of not making the trip down there before that. But it was lovely to meet you there. We were there for your book launch for A Real Animal. And I believe it was your publicist introduced you and said, Emeline, would you like to give people kind of an overview of your book? And at the time, you were very fresh talking about your book, and you gave the synopsis of it's about a girl, which is not wrong, but also not very descriptive.
Yeah. Yes, I have had trouble figuring out how to talk about the book. It's been, honestly, since the very beginning, since I was querying agents and submitting it to publishers. So it's been a learning curve, to say the least. But I think ultimately it is about a girl. I think I'm a little bit better at talking about it now. I've given a little more thought to it, but you definitely got me in my most, I can't believe I felt taken aback that somebody had asked me at the book launch to describe my book, but I was so taken aback. Yeah.
I love the opportunity. My wife and I read a lot of debut authors. It's kind of who we're drawn to. It's fun. It's gives us a chip on our shoulder to say, hey, we read this author before they were cool. So now you have the pressure of you need to become cool now. I think you're there. We'll find out in July. The book is one that is difficult to describe because it is 10 years of a girl's life that is in her 20s. It's very much a coming of age story, and it is a rough coming of age story. And I was curious, what does entering into adulthood mean to you, and is the story a reflection of that?
Yeah, I think it definitely is a coming of age story. I hadn't thought about it that way until beginning to talk to people now that have read it. It's very strange to finally talk to people that have read a project that I just didn't think people were going to be reading. And yeah, I've been thinking a lot about how Lucy's what it means to come of age in the years that Lucy is, the 20s being the coming of age story as opposed to before that or after that. I think right now, what is standing out to me most about the book is the way it is talking about what it means to live within a traumatized body, and maybe also what it means to live within a traumatized world, and how those two things are sort of going together in Lucy's, as she is trying to find her way back into her own body and make a home for herself in the world, which I think a lot of your 20s coming of age in that time is molded by that desire to explore and have adventures and go off, and the overwhelming tyranny of choice around who you're going to end up with, what you're going to do with your life, where you're going to live. And then at the same time, I think this, longing to nest, to find your right habitat, to find your right home, to feel at home with somebody else, which would mean, to feel deeply known by somebody else, which Lucy struggles with. And I think for me, I started writing the book in my early 20s, and I just turned 30 2 weeks ago. So I'm now the age that Lucy is when the book ends. So I've been reflecting a little bit about that. I guess it makes sense, but it wasn't something I was necessarily that conscious of when I was writing it. But it is interesting to me that so much of the early part of my 20s and Lucy's 20s is, you're really intoxicated by the extraordinariness that your life can be. You want this huge life where every option remains available to you at all times. I think Lucy says that she thinks the point of living is just to be as free as possible for as long as possible. And then as you start to get older, I think that freedom ends up feeling really isolating sometimes, and you actually do want to root down and find community and be with a partner and feel known by the people around you. And that was definitely the kind of adventure that I was on, where suddenly the ordinariness of life felt really special and important, which isn't, I think, that unique of a trajectory, but definitely Lucy's on that as well.
And the beginning of the book really draws you in with this metaphysical transformation that Lucy has. Can you kind of talk about your decision process in where that story originated from?
Yeah, I can remember very specifically where I was when the first sentence of the book came to me, which now I'm going to butcher it, but I think it's, as the leopard, I had no memory of ever having been anything other. We had changed it to anything else. It's back to anything other in the final printed version. And that sentence came to me. So actually backing up a little bit, in my early 20s, I experienced a traumatic thing. And I remember at the moment, or sort of in the wake of that happening, the feeling I had was like, I don't know what to do with my body anymore. I feel sort of ruined. Like, how am I going to move forward with this? And I think I was encountering that thing again in your early 20s or in the early part of your life, where you come up against like permanence. Like, oh, is this experience going to be part of me forever and part of my body? And in the wake of me trying to figure out what to do with that and what to do with my body, I randomly decided to learn how to scuba dive, which didn't feel related at the time. But there's obviously scuba diving in the book. And I just fell in love with it, because when I was underwater, I remember just feeling this liberation of, oh, my body can do so many amazing things. It can change into anything. I can become anything. And being in a habitat like so different than mine, among bodies that were so different than mine, I remember also feeling this gratitude for my own body and thinking, I actually really do love my body. My body's going to be okay. My body's actually capable of immense transformation. And I felt like there was something really important in understanding coexistence and like the fact that you are a body in a world of so many different species and habitats and ways of being. And I think there was something that felt, now I can't even find the words, but at least it felt in my body really healing for me to, not like anthropomorphize or like impose my own human consciousness upon the animals around me, but just like feel the consciousness and life of all the different species happening to me. And then I think that the dream or the vision of becoming a leopard or, becoming a different kind of consciousness, a different kind of body, felt like where I wanted to go. And that was very healing for me, Emeline. And then I think that the Lucy scene sort of emerged from that.
The geography locations, I was curious how much of that, like if I was reading too much into the metaphors of the deep sea and then the plains of Texas, but you did go into scuba diving personally. You do live in Texas, but did those geographies play into the storytelling and the character building for Lucy?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I'm happy to talk more about it. I'm trying to figure out, I'm definitely a writer. I'm sort of like a writer who the fiction is always going to be coming pretty closely my own experiences. I don't think I have a lot of thoughts about that. But the landscapes that I'm in are definitely the ones that my fiction emerges out of. But I don't think that imagination necessarily should be measured in terms of, how far away you are from what you're experiencing, like in terms of proximity. I think that imagination should be measured more in terms of like depth of embodiment. Like, are you actually embodying something different? It doesn't matter how different than the reality that you, let's say, experienced. but that's sort of a separate conversation. But the ocean and in Texas, I mean, just those two landscapes felt really important for Lucy in myriad ways. I think for what was inspiring to me about those landscapes is I moved to Texas after having taught scuba diving in Thailand. I had been there for about a year, and I moved to Texas for the Michener Center for my MFA, and I just missed the ocean so much. I thought, I could not stand the landscape here, the dryness, the vastness, the billboards, the roads, and I was so far away from the ocean. Fast forward a few years, I met my now fiance, and he loves the landscape. There's definitely resonances with him and the character Liam, but Chris, he just wants to drive out into West Texas and just, stand out in the middle of the vast, vast landscape. And I could not understand that for so long. Like there's something that felt very, intuitively depressing to me about that. I don't know why. Now I've really come around to it and love it. And I think I started to see how both of those landscapes have this expansiveness, this sense of unity in the just looking out. When you're in the middle of the ocean, you're far away from the reefs and it's just blue all around you, and there's always opportunity for a giant pelagic to swim by, but you're really what appealed to me about diving was the supposed nothingness of just the nothingness of thought, the nothingness of feeling. It was just breath and blue, and you're just kind of suspended. And I sort of started to realize, oh, Chris, my fiance, in this landscape, I think is feeling the same kind of thrill, but it's just in a different setting. So it didn't feel too random to move Lucy from the ocean to the desert per se.
Getting into I wrote down romantic trajectories, and I don't like the word romantic with how some of them were.
Yeah.
So
I like it.
Yeah. What was that?
I kind of like it, but
okay. Let's get into the romantic trajectories of Lucy. How did you approach writing a highly intelligent narrator who's kind of continuously making questionable and somewhat dangerous decisions?
Yeah, I know. One of the things that's been somewhat heartbreaking but not unexpected is, people are so frustrated by Lucy from the readers that I've interacted with, and she is so deeply frustrating and chaotic and wounded. And I think a lot of the book, when I've been kind of reckoning with that, I wasn't trying to write a character who was liked one way or another, or I guess I wasn't writing Lucy through the idea of how is she going to be perceived. But now that she's out in the world, I'm like, oh, okay, so this is, people are frustrated by her. I think a lot of the book is about, how do we love, understand, accept people that are deeply frustrating and wounded, that have desires and make decisions that are really difficult for us to inhabit ourselves. Those people can also be parts of us, and I think with the book, whether or not people like the book or like Lucy, all I can hope for is that anyone would read it and feel somewhat seen by any kind of part of it, because we're all kind of messy, and we all have violence in us, and predation and different things that I think can be really alienating. In terms of just the romantic relationships, I think the way I have been coming to understand 3 of the romantic relationships, Cole, the college boyfriend, Ellis, the difficult one, and then Liam, is in the most basic sense, I started thinking about it in terms of just physicality and habitat, to make it very animalistic. But with Cole, I was starting to realize that in the scenes that we see Lucy and Cole together, Cole is always in Lucy's space. And Cole has a lot of timidness around approaching or touching Lucy. Lucy is really the one that is in command of the environment when Cole is around. And I think Lucy doesn't, actually is very uncomfortable by that. It doesn't like that dynamic, doesn't like holding that space. Ellis, both the spaces that we always see Ellis and Lucy in together are neither one of their spaces. Ellis is from out of town. Lucy's from out of town. They are, moving through, I think in Indianapolis, both of their apartments are barely decorated. There's nothing in them. And they're both like vying for territory to some degree. I see Lucy and Ellis's relationship. There's certainly abuse and violence. And Lucy is in very, difficult and harmful situations, but I see it as two people that are capable of some of the same instincts and are trying to fight for their own individuality in a certain way. And then with Liam, Lucy is so desperate to be loved by him. I think, she really, really loves Liam. And she is consistently only painfully in his space. And I think she is so worried that she doesn't fit into his home or his world or his space. And she is trying so hard to mold herself into the type of creature that can peacefully exist in his space. And I think that, when you see what's interesting with, Lucy and Ellis, a lot of their interactions are very, aggressive, obviously. And then with Liam, when Lucy needs comfort, he's really good at, even if she's pushing him away, he still leans in and swaddles her until she kind of calms down. And I think that's actually that is the physicality that is the most comforting and fitting for her. She doesn't want to scare like she does with Cole. She doesn't want to fight like she does with Ellis, but she wants to be sort of held, which Liam, I think, is good at.
Really did appreciate the messiness of it all as I was trying to explain it to people as I was reading it. Like it felt like I had stumbled upon someone's diary, and I felt like I shouldn't have been reading different aspects of it. And I, as a 41-year-old father of 3, I'm probably not your target audience, but I like to, I have found, I've talked with like Catherine Newman, Hannah Pittard, and Lauren Oakey last year. And for all of them, I'm like, you have all ruined male authors for me. Now, like, I'm getting into different characters and just the emotions that are involved in it. And I just really appreciate the openness that you have and the stories that you're telling and getting into the grittiness of it all. There was one author that I wrote it down somewhere, but The Fuck Up by Arthur, I think it's Nessner, and just following somebody's voyage who you may not agree with their choices, but just the grittiness of it all. As I was reading it, I kept thinking back, and I read that book like 20 years ago. But thinking through that voyage and the amount of times that I oddly identified with Lucy's character, of like just thinking of the things that you discover in your 20s, of the trauma that you didn't realize was trauma, the generational aspects of family dynamics, and fully, once you're out in the world and not in this safe environment of school, what happens when you're like, oh, that thing that I experienced was not a normal thing. How do I how do I now deal with that?
I think that is just moving through your 20s and trying to gauge, even beyond the question of like how normal is this or not, but how traumatic was that or not? Because we're the world is so good at detaching us from our bodies. Like, our bodies actually know how traumatizing something is or wasn't. And like the fact that we have so much dialogue going in our heads with, how uniquely traumatic was this or not, and trying to find, points of comparison in other experiences, which sometimes it's comforting and sometimes it's not.
Let's get into that more. I just the idea of trauma, and it's a question that I think I first started asking. We probably all first started asking in our 20s of what is normal and how do I experience how do I get to that sense of normalcy. So for Lucy's character and the internal monologues, and there is that sense of, and I think it's written in the book. I read it 3 months ago, so I'm jogging some of my memory here. But the things that we want to say and don't say, and it's something that you see in like rom-coms all the time. This is not a rom-com, but when you're just screaming at the character of, why don't you just say what you want to say? And talk about Lucy's growth as a character as she discovers her voice and how she wants to navigate through these relationships.
Yeah. I think, when we're, maybe not even when we're young, just in general, there's so much safety in holding a secret, and also a lot of danger. There's so much safety in keeping parts of your life private, or just holding those inner thoughts really precious and private from other people. I used to find a lot of power in that sometimes, of like knowing, oh, this person doesn't know this about me. I'm able to sort of hold this double life to some degree. I think that one of the chapters, I think this is what the chapter is still called, but I had changed. Is there a chapter called Duplicitous Existence? I think that's the name of one of the chapters.
It could be.
If it's not, there's that phrase is in the book somewhere. But that sort of sense, I do know there is a moment where Lucy says at one point, she says, I'm no longer interested in having a duplicitous existence or having multiple lives all happening at the same time. I still want multiple lives, but one after the other, not all at once, sort of like gesturing towards, the allure of reincarnation to some degree. But I think that is a little bit of what happens as we get older. When you're young, I think Mary Ruefle said this in an interview, so I'm repeating her, but when you're young, your life is actually very unified. You're existing in a very unified space. And then as you get older, you start to get so good at compartmentalization. And the person that shows up at school is different from the one you are with your parents, which is different from who you are with your siblings or your friends or your first, love interest. And then Mary Ruefle in this interview was saying, then as you get older, which has a little bit of that like Wordsworthian arc, you actually start coming back into unity and things become less compartmentalized and like more consistent again. And there's something very beautiful about that, because the compartmentalization really interrupts your sense of entity, not identity, but your sense of like oneness and wholeness. And I think that, in youth and with Lucy, holding those privacies and those secrets and those different ways of being, I think Lucy finds a lot of power and freedom in that. When she's first with Ellis, and there's like a long passage where she's just going on and on and on. And at one moment she had, it had been like pages that then got cut down to a few paragraphs, but she was just going on and on and on about how being with Ellis made her realize that, like two things, everyone is the same. And because of that, it doesn't really matter what one person thinks of you, because you can be whoever you want with any other next person, which was like sort of that, the sense of, just men being dime a dozen, coming into the bedroom, leaving the bedroom. And every single time was a new opportunity for her to be perceived totally differently and for her to show up totally differently in some kind of way. But what happens is if you're leaning into that too much, it makes it really, really hard to build intimacy with somebody. And I think one of the tragedies with her and Liam, without trying to give anything away, is just she is so scared of being fully known by him because she's so believing that he really only loves certain parts of her, which I guess is like the thing that we all are dealing with. Are we actually totally lovable? Are there, even if we have one or two unlovable parts, is that going to mean that we're not lovable at all because we have those parts of us that aren't? But in order to get there, you have to have the vulnerability of just being like, okay, this is me, to take it or leave it, and let's see. And I think that's what was really, really, scary for Lucy. And, ultimately, I think her sister ends up being like the hero of the book, probably in a lot of ways. But yeah.
Would you like to get into some of the unresolved or lately dealt with generational trauma and how that impacted Lucy's life?
I haven't heard, not many people have actually asked me about that part of the book. And do you sort of mean like the mother and the mom's funeral and that sort of scene?
That scene specifically, we won't reveal what happens in that scene, but overall, and I don't know if my mom consumes my content. I don't know if she'll watch this far into the interview. We're just gonna say she didn't. Just from my own personal experience of like the relationship that I have with my parents, or the lack in relationship that I've had with my parents growing up, and then dealing with that in my 20s and into my 30s, and now as a parent myself, it was something that I connected with, of seeing the dysfunction there and how that impacted Lucy and how that impacted her desire to have family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, a few things and how to talk about it without totally giving anything away. But I think, although total step back and you can cut this.
Yeah.
I do believe I hope that good books can't actually be spoiled, and that I could say anything and it wouldn't ruin it for people. But I don't think that's totally true. And I don't think my book is good enough to take that on yet. But I think with that, with families, there were a few things that I wanted to explore in the book. One was the role of silence in a family, because, Lucy's mom famously gives her the silent, cuts her off, gives her the silent treatment. And Lucy, the struggle of her upbringing is she isn't ever able to identify what it is exactly that made her mom stop talking to her. That's hugely, hugely traumatizing for kids, I think, to not know, to be cut off from the love of their mother or their father or their parent, and not know why. And we sort of learn, a lot of that is because of the secrets and the life and the privacies that her own mother is holding. And that Lucy can really scare her mom, not because Lucy is scary, but because of what Lucy might be revealing about her mother and her mother's choices and her mother's, insecurities and vulnerabilities. I also, with the leopard, I think there's definitely a way of reading the leopard, and the way that the first chapter is set up, and this doesn't give anything away because it's all in the first 30 pages. The way to read the leopard is that the leopard emerged out of rape and like cheating, infidelity, lies, and secrecy, which of course, both of those things you would think, oh, of course, there's a way to psychologically read this as, when something traumatic happens to your body to the degree that it causes that amount of dissociation, and infidelity and lying and holding private lives can also cause a lot of dissociation. And like those two things hitting, coming to their peak might erupt in this kind of, psychotic break, if we wanted to fully diagnose it that way.
Yeah.
I think the other way to read it is when you've been, if you've been growing up or living a number of years in a reality that isn't quite, what it actually is. Like, so if you're in a family that you think is one way, and maybe the parents or the other people in the family know that it's a different way, but no one's saying anything, that sort of dissociation would get really baked in, I think, into your body. And when, especially as a kid, you don't have a lot of power of interrogating that or trying to understand where that feeling is coming from, but you're just kind of living with that feeling of, I don't really feel like I belong, but maybe that's just, and I think that even outside of Lucy's situation, that can be the way, even in totally different situations where there might not be any clear reason for feeling that way, that feeling can be really traumatic also, and lead to, when not feeling like you belong is a really hard feeling to have in your body for a long time.
I want to just kind of touch on the conclusion without revealing what the end of the book is, because that, no matter how good the book is, people don't want to know what the end is. But just kind of your interpretation of the conclusion of the story. I'm curious because I have my own thoughts, obviously, but did you find it to be a tragic or triumphant end of the story for Lucy at that time?
Oh, I'm so glad you're asking that. That is the question, I think. Yeah, people haven't asked me that yet. And that is the question I've struggled with, because I don't know. And when I read the book, I'm hoping I'm going to reread the book before it comes out so that I have it fresh in my head. Yeah. It is remarkable how quickly you can forget about the book that you wrote. But the last time I read it and I thought, oh my God, this is the saddest thing I've ever written. Why would I put this out into the world? This is doom and gloom. Like, what? I felt sort of devastated for her. And then I read it before that, and I'm hoping that this time around when I read it, before that, when I read it, I felt so empowered and, thinking, of course, this can be a happy ending. Like, maybe this is Lucy's happy ending. Obviously, this is Lucy's happy ending. And, when she says, if I'm giving anything away, just cut. Freedom to cut. But the line to me that two things. One is the line that I think about a lot that is in the ending of the book is Lucy says something like, she basically said something along the lines of, I've figured it out. As long as you're good with yourself, you can be out in the dark, cold, alone, and you can be good anywhere, basically. Or if you could be out in the dark, cold, alone, you're good anywhere, as long as you're good with yourself, which is a beautiful, beautiful thought. I'm like, that is transcendentalist. That is Emersonian. I mean, that is the highly idealistic version of you and your body are all that matter. And if you are good, you can take on the world. At the same time, I think that on Lucy's journey is recognizing that does not exist in a silo. Being good with yourself also means understanding that your survival depends deeply upon your ability to coexist with other things, which I think is something that all of us humans are still realizing. Like, if we continue to kill each other and kill the natural world around us, we won't survive. So, we actually have to learn how to re-embrace the fact that we are interdependent creatures. And I think that where Lucy finds herself in the end of the book, it actually is balancing those two spaces. She is, deeply connected to the environment around her in that moment, and wildness and wilderness. And she also is feeling really safe and secure in her own self. So I think that for sure is a happy ending. But writing the book, the ending came out of a lot of the book came out of a lot of my deepest fears, I think, for myself in my early 20s. I think a lot of even the things I'm writing now come out of these alternate realities that spin up out of my deepest fears. Like yes, I sort of write what I know, obviously, but I'm definitely in that line of thinking of writing what you're afraid to know, kind of writing into fear, into the darkness, into the other world, like imagining what would it be if this person in my life died, for example. Horrible thought. What would it be if this horrible thing happened? And definitely Lucy's ending came out of like, what would it be like if I ended up like that, if I ended up there, which was where the sadness, I think, comes from. Yeah.
There, I hesitate even to bring it up because I don't remember it. There's a Nietzsche quote that I kept thinking of while I was reading your book that I had read when I was in college, and I just kind of like made questionable decisions, as we all do in my early 20s. And it was part of the reason that I had connected with the character of Lucy so much was, as long as I know that this isn't the most rational decision, I'm okay, because I'm cognizant that what I'm doing right now isn't the most rational thing. And there's a Nietzsche quote that kind of like praises the people that go for the not most advantageous of advantages. And that was something like I kept thinking back on that quote that I now butchered and completely forgot the rest of it. It's like a paragraph. But thinking on that quote and reading your book just really connected me back to the headspace that I was in my 20s, which I think will be the appeal for people that are reading it that are going through that decade of their life. And then for the people that are 10, 20 years and beyond, past that point, I feel that so many people are going to connect with Lucy's story. And even if it makes them angry, I think it is a worthwhile journey for them to go down that lane. There's a number of people that have watched or listened to our podcasts, myself being one of them, that are aspiring writers or struggling writers to go through that. What was some of your process like as you were beginning the story, editing the story, and then trying to get it out into the world? Obviously, that is a long thing. Feel free to edit it down into as much as you can.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I have so many things. So I think the thing that I've been coming back to the most when people have asked me about process, which might not be helpful, but maybe can be reassuring, is the number one thing to do is just figure out what your process is. And everybody's process is different. And, I, for example, hate mine. I wish that my process was different than it is. I envy other people's, but my process is what it is. And my only job then, now that I kind of know the way that I write right now in my life, is just to set up the conditions for it to happen when it needs to. Because I think what happens is a lot of people are sometimes spend a lot of time trying to mold themselves into the process that they think works, like, write every day, revise this way, send out your book to agents when it's at this point, and that ends up, writing is the most inefficient thing in the world, beautifully so. We should not be trying to bring efficiency into writing. That is not the point at all. Completely antithetical, but that is a different rant. But I think that, if you're trying to write with a different process than what yours is, you end up writing when you probably shouldn't be, and then not writing when you probably should be, basically. For my book, I'm like a sprint and stop writer. Like, I will write, well into the night, hours on end, and then not write for several weeks. The joke with my friends and I is like, we think that we're writing just like at all times. We're like this conversation with you, we're like, oh, I'm writing, which is a little like highfalutin, but it makes you feel better. And I have a full-time job, so my writing process has got like a wrench has been thrown into it a little bit, but I've had to adapt to that, like still create the conditions that I can so that it can happen despite, working all the time. Yeah.
And this feels like a lame name drop, but a different Winter Institute that I went to in Seattle, I ended up sitting down at a table. Actually, I was sitting down at the table, and then Andre Dubus III sat down next to me, and I had just read his book, Such Kindness, and really connected. He's one of the few male authors that I still enjoy his book because of the grittiness and rawness and the emotion that he puts into it. But his writing process, he feels like it needs to be like a manly activity. So he will write on the floor, or just he needs to be uncomfortable when he's writing. So it feels like he's woodworking or something. Yeah. But that was one of the most interesting answers that I've heard in terms of writing process. But the sprint and stop is something that I can identify with. My problem is I stop for way too long.
Oh yeah.
And then, time gets away from me, and then I get back to the thing that I had started, and I don't know what this is anymore.
I know. That happens to me too. I was talking to somebody on the Catapult team the other day about the seed of my process that I hate, but c'est la vie, is I write when I'm sleeping, is what I think I'm doing, which really just means that if I know I have a deadline, an actual deadline, because it is kind of rare, I think, for fiction writers to have actual deadlines, but I will basically not do anything all day, like a procrastinator, maybe just reread the last thing I wrote for the piece, maybe before dinner. And then when I fall asleep that night, I just end up in bed on my dumb notes app. I mean, I wrote most of this book on my notes app, which is so hideously embarrassing and unromantic. I hate saying that, but it's true. And I just will be waking up at 2 a.m., 4 a.m. and writing in my notes app and not really remembering. And then the next morning I will have kind of figured out whatever it is. And then I am able, once you kind of get there, I think then you can sit down and just kind of hammer it out, because the obsession's been reignited.
Oh, there were just existing in threads and book talk. Something that I keep singing again and again is just keep writing, because the first thing that you write isn't going to be the first book that's published. So what novels do you have floating around out there that are either unfinished, or what's the story that you really wish that you could have told or really want to tell?
Oh yeah. I have this book. I have two books. I have one book about it's sort of about a grandfather and a granddaughter and a dad that is I was really into a few years ago, and I sort of lost my love for it. And then I have this book that I always thought I was gonna write, which is about scuba diving, about two scuba dive instructors, which is sort of the book I'm working on now, what I hope will be my next book. I started teaching scuba diving again in Austin, Texas, just to try and help with this book. But it's not quite. I had written there are 400 pages of this book that exist that I probably should just look at again. I'm too scared to look at it. I kind of want to start over, but just because it feels so I was writing it, 8 years ago now. So yeah, I'm just how to make it fresh again. But then sometimes at the end of the day, I'm you have to be writing what you're interested in right now, or it's not going to work. You have to be writing out of obsession and genuine interest, and it can be about anything. And maybe I'm just not as interested in that story anymore. But yeah, there's definitely pages and pages of that. And then I used to write a lot of short stories, and I haven't been writing short stories as much anymore. I wish I had short stories, because that would be, honestly, just for making a career out of writing, it's helpful to have short stories that you can send places and see if they can get published, but I don't have any at the moment. So I'm like sort of, I'm kind of, I'm in that funny moment with that funny moment. I don't know why I'm having to define it, but I just am like, how much of a career or job is this going to be? And what do I do next? And I think that it probably isn't even the right question to ask. I think I just have to keep puttering along and writing the way that I always had it, and not letting sort of the career aspirations dictate too much. But it's hard to not, especially because this is the first time that I've published anything. So I don't really know what's next.
Well, to give you some good spirits your way, in the 15 years of various forms of book selling that I've been in, I've never seen the response from your publishing team about your work just across the board, that everyone was completely obsessed with it. I have never seen that from another publisher for another author. So kudos to you for that. So I think you have to keep writing and keep publishing books so we can keep reading them. Just a couple quick questions that can be two separate ones, or you can combine them into one if you'd like. Some of your favorite authors and writing influences / book recommendations for us to go on to while we wait for your book to come out July 7th.
Okay. I have been taking a lot of comfort in reading actually books on craft right now, which I just never, I don't know why that has been what's been hitting, and by that I mean I'm rereading the Prosody Handbook, which is a book on versification and poetry, which I think is excellent. And then I just reread this book, Virginia Tufts' Artful Sentences, Syntax as Style. This is just for people that maybe take comfort in, breaking down language to some degree. And then I've been rereading a lot of the romantic poets like Coleridge, Keats, Blake, Wordsworth, and later, but Whitman. And then, so that's sort of poetry. And then, Dion Brand nomenclature. I haven't, nomenclature is like a huge, I love poetry. I love, my first love is poetry. I love poetry. So that's like mostly what I've been reading. Ammons, A.R. Ammons. And okay, so that's that. Then I read my friend Abigail's book Off Season, which I thought was excellent. That came out with Astra. And I just reread Mrs. Dalloway, Virginia Woolf. I've read Lily Dunn's On Being, Into Being, Lily Dunn's Into Being, which is a book on the craft of writing memoir, which came out, I think, last year. And I read that because I'm very into memoir right now. And she had written this beautiful memoir, Sins of My Father, a few years ago. And I also just read Natasha Trethewey's memoir, Memorial Drive, which was a knockout and absolutely devastating. So yeah, that being said, my influences, definitely poetry, which, it's sort of boring. I hope not to insult the great poets I'm about to reference, but like all my favorite poets are, Elizabeth Bishop, Emily Dickinson, Robert Frost was my first love, and Robert Lowell and James Wright. Love James Wright deeply. So I go back to them when I'm trying to find my voice, because I think just the tradition of imagism in poetry, that's always been very, like, I love images. I love the way James Wright writes about horses and the natural world. And then Dennis Johnson, Jhumpa Lahiri, Elizabeth Strout, Aldous Kittredge. These are all books growing up that I just was obsessed with. So yeah, those I go back to, honestly, even more so than Jesus' Son, I go back to Largest of the Sea Maiden, Dennis Johnson's posthumous story collection, because that first story and the one Triumph Over the Grave, I think it's called, those two stories I just am obsessed with. I love those stories. But yeah, Dennis Johnson is someone who, like, I've read all of his work. But I think that, you know, a lot of people that go through an MFA have read a lot of Dennis Johnson. He's definitely one of those authors that everybody likes to read in these writing programs. But I loved him before, and then fell more in love with him during. But yeah.
Awesome. You have given us quite a lengthy list, so thank you for that.
Yeah, you don't need to read the Artful Sentences in the Prosody Handbook if you're not into that kind of stuff. It's acquired taste.
I think I will definitely pick up the Lily Dunn Into Being, though. That sounds. We interviewed Matthew Quick like 4 years ago and had a great talk about toxic masculinity, and he was talking about like his relationship with his father, and now he has his memoir coming out, Dad Love Me. And I don't know that I've ever been more afraid of a book. It's been sitting on my end table in the living room for at least a month. I would like to read it. I would like to interview him again, but I'm just like, I don't know what this book is going to do to me on an emotional level. So it sits there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the memoir can really get you, like, hardcore. Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. Really looking forward to getting a real animal into our customers' hands. You can pre-order it through our website. It comes out July 7th. Great book, great read. If you're not convinced to read it by now, what are you still doing listening to this? Emeline, thank you so much again for the time today.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob.